This would be Friday, November 21st. We're going to finish our story of the Landlady and then get into our fun stuff from there. Let's see. Do the quick review from what we had yesterday. We have the main character.
Billy.
Who's our main character?
Billy.
What's Billy's last name? Weaver. How old is Billy? 17, and he's out on his own. He's a business person, and he wears his fancy
Fedora.
little trilby-looking hat. What town is our our story taking place in? In Bath, which is near London, which is near Reading. How does he get to Bath? By train. And then he talks to the porter. And what's a porter?
A person who carries the bags.
Carries the bags. And where's the porter tell him to go to stay?
Go to the Bell and Dragon.
Bell and Dragon. He's going to go to the Bell and the Dragon. And then on the way to the Bell and the Dragon, what does he come across? Bed and breakfast.
Old woman that feels it.
Thank you.
Something about
Comes across the bed and breakfast. He decides to not stay there because it was going to be too expensive. He's like, I don't want to do that. But before he leaves, he gets pulled to it by the sign. It's just like mesmerizing. It's so pretty. And then he tries to wander off, goes up to the door. When he rings the doorbell, what happens?
The lady comes
The ding, and then she opens out, and the dog, and it freaks him out. Oh, and then the dachshund, and what's the other pet that's in there? Parrot. And then he makes the comment that having pets is a good sign in a place like this. Why is it a good sign? The idea of being able to take care of pets is a good thing. The hot water bottle, so he gets inside and find out, is he the only one staying there?
Yes.
That he's the only one that's there right now by himself, and she tries to have the place all prepared and ready for him. Oh, what does he think about her?
She's creepy.
Yeah, not creepy. He says
Not cannibal.
and not psychotic. Just
Weird cannibal.
loopy, like
Cannibal.
grandma, not cannibals. And not just non-stop yelling out loud backwards to Petula again. I know. I would probably recommend that too. Because if not, he's just going to keep eating your toys.
I know.
It's the worst ever. And so you have the fact that, the Dottie, the fact that she's just a little bit different. And then they're walking up the stairs. Oh, walking up the stairs, what does she do?
Tells him he has the
He's the perfect one.
And then says that she waits for someone who is just right. And that then she gives him the old up and downy looky, which he's like, oh, that's fine, she's just an old lady. And then we left off where we got to the part where she said to sign the book. And what book? You do realize I'm going to charge you points, right? If you keep doing that. You think. What is the book that she's referring to? Petula? The guest book. And she's like, I don't want to break the law at this point. Make sure you sign the guest book so that we're good to go. Now we're on the back side, that second column where he said he's going to he found the guest book lying open and he realized he recognizes the two names. I'm still going to do her voice in reading just because I enjoy it because I'm special. All right, Mac Ewan, we'll give you a chance to start from there where it says, that's funny.
Okay. That's funny, he thought suddenly. Christopher Mulholland. It rings a bell. Now, where on earth had he heard that rather unusual name before? Was he a boy at school? No. Was it one of his sister's numerous young men, perhaps, or a friend of his father's? No, it wasn't any of those. He glanced down again at the book. Christopher Mulholland, 231 Cathedral Road, Cardiff. Gregory W. Temple, 27 Sycamore Drive, Bristol. As a matter of fact, now he came to think of it, he wasn't at all sure that the second name didn't have almost as much of a familiar ring about it as the first. Gregory Temple, he said aloud, searching his memory. Christopher Mulholland.
Such charming boys!
A voice behind him answered, and he turned and saw his landlady sailing into the room with a large silver tea tray in her hands. She was holding it well out in front of her and rather high up, as though the tray were a pair of reins on a frisky horse. They sound somehow familiar, he said.
They do? How interesting. And then pause there. When she brings in the tray, the way that they describe the tray, I brought in the tray.
Did you glue it on?
No. And so brings in the tray. Normally, in order to not make them fall, you want to keep it in a nice, balanced area. How does she bring the tray in?
She's like.
Yeah, like that, how you hold the reins of a frisky horse. So she brings them up like this. So when she walks in with the tray, she comes in and then sets the tray down, which is odd.
Weird.
But just to make sure you can visualize how she's bringing that in.
Why is she so weird?
Because she's old. Alright, keep going from there, dear.
So when you get old, you're gonna say
Yeah. Charms you are.
I'm almost positive.
I know.
Okay.
I was waiting for them to.
I'll just charge them points.
I'm almost positive I've heard those names before somewhere. Isn't that queer? Maybe it was in the newspapers. They weren't famous in any way, were they? I mean, famous cricketers or footballers or something like that?
Cricket, by the way, is
Yes.
yeah, it's the Middle Eastern Indian cricketer. Yeah, there you go.
legs are gonna explode.
Oh,
Famous?
she said, setting the tea tray down on the low table in front of the sofa.
Oh no, I don't think they were famous, but they were extraordinarily handsome. Both of them. I can promise you that. They were tall and young and handsome, my dear, just exactly like you.
Once more, Billy glanced down at the book. Look here, he said, noticing the dates. This last entry is over 2 years old.
It is?
Yes, indeed. And Christopher Mulholland's is nearly a year before that, more than 3 years ago.
Carter.
Okay, so he said that he was. So that means he probably died.
Or that he's not there anymore, so she doesn't know anything about him.
Yeah, I'm still going with the cannibalism.
But tell him.
Are you sure she's old?
He said she's old, like 40 or
45 to
so
50.
55, something like that.
It's not. You know.
So, no, I mean, she's still a lady, and she can still recognize handsome young gentlemen when she sees them. It's not creepy, it's just
Weird.
creepy. Good way to go around that one. Tendai! Dear me!
She said, shaking her head and heaving a dainty little sigh.
I never would have thought it. How time does fly away from us all, doesn't it, Mr. Wilkins?
It's Weaver, Billy said. W-E-A-V-E-R.
Of course it is.
She cried, sitting down on the sofa.
How silly of me. I do apologize. In one ear and out the other. That's me, Mr. Weaver.
You know something, Billy said? Something that's really quite extraordinary about all this?
No, dear, I don't.
Well, you see, both of these names, Mulholland and Temple, I not only seem to remember each of them separately, so to speak, but somehow or other, in some peculiar way, they both appear to be sort of connected together as well, as though they were both famous for the same sort of thing, if you see what I mean, like
Dempsey?
Dempsey and Tooney.
Tunny?
Honey, for example, or Churchill, or Roosevelt.
So what he's saying about the names is that he recognizes them. They're famous for something, and they're famous for the same thing. When he mentions Dempsey and Tunney, they were famous boxers from around this time period, and they had these big boxing bouts. And so their names were always connected. There's always Dempsey and Tunney, Dempsey and Tunney. And then the other one, hopefully you know Churchill and Roosevelt, they are...
Scientists.
Roosevelt was this thing called a president? Yeah. And then the other one, Churchill, was the prime minister of England. And so, but during World War II, their names were always connected together. It was always Churchill and then Roosevelt, Churchill. So like these two names, they're both famous for something, and whatever it is, they're connected together. And whatever it was probably not being eaten. Dear.
Okay, so she said in one ear, not the other. That probably means that she like took a spoon or a saw or something, then like
You're just
dug
getting
in the
crazy
ear or
now.
something.
From there, Clark, I'll pick up. How amusing!
She said.
But come over here now, dear. Sit down beside me on the sofa, and I'll give you a nice cup of tea and a ginger biscuit before you go to bed.
You really shouldn't bother, Billy said. I didn't mean you to do anything like that. He stood by the piano, watching her as she fussed about with the cups and saucers. He noticed that she had small, white, quickly moving hands and fingernails.
Go ahead.
I'm almost positive those in the newspapers. I saw them, Billy said. I'll think of it in a second. I'm sure I will. There is nothing more tantalizing than a thing like this which lingers outside the borders of one's memory. he hated to give up. Now wait a minute, he said. Wait just a minute. Mulholland. Christopher Mulholland. Wasn't that the name of the
Eton.
schoolboy who was on a walking tour through the West Country, then all of a sudden...
Milk?
she said,
Sugar?
Yes, please. And then all of a sudden...
Eton schoolboy? Oh, no, my dear, that can't possibly be right, because my Mr. Mulholland was certainly not an Eton schoolboy when he came to me. He was a Cambridge undergraduate. Come over here now and sit next to me and warm yourself in front of this lovely fire. Come on, your tea's all ready for you.
She patted the empty place beside her on the sofa, and she sat there, smiling at Billy and waiting for him to come over.
Then I'll give you guys the last page. And I'll keep reading.
Wasn't it Eton's schoolboy?
Eton's a town, like Fishers or something like that. Sorry, Crazy, you're out of luck. He crossed the room slowly and sat down on the edge of the sofa. She placed his teacup on the table in front of him. There we are, she said. How nice and cozy this is, isn't it? Billy started sipping his tea. She did the same. For half a minute or so, neither of them spoke. But Billy knew that she was looking at him. Her body was half turned towards him, and he could feel her eyes resting on his face, watching him over the rim of her teacup. Now and again, he caught a whiff of a peculiar smell that seemed to emanate directly from her person. It was not in the least unpleasant, and it reminded him, well, he wasn't quite sure what it reminded him of. Pickled walnuts? New leather? Or was it the corridors of a hospital? At length, she said, Mr. Mulholland was a great one for his tea. Never in my life have I seen anyone drink as much tea as dear, sweet Mr. Mulholland. Oh, I suppose he left fairly recently, Billy said. He was still puzzling his head about the two names. He was positive now that they had seen them in the newspapers, in the headlines. Left, she said, arching her brows. My dear boy, he never left. He's still here. Mr. Temple's also here. They're on the 3rd floor, both of them together. Billy set down his cup slowly on the table and stared at his landlady. She smiled back at him, and then she put out one of her white hands and patted him comfortingly on the knee. How old are you, my dear? She asked. 17. 17, she cried. Oh, it's the perfect age. Mr. Mulholland was also 17, but I think he was a trifle shorter than you are. In fact, I'm sure he was, and his teeth weren't quite so white. You have the most beautiful teeth, Mr. Weaver. Did you know that? They're not as good as they look, Billy said. They've got simply masses of fillings in them at the back. Mr. Temple, of course, was a little older, she said, ignoring his remark. He was actually 28, and yet I never would have guessed it if he hadn't told me. Never in my whole life. There wasn't a blemish on his body. What? Billy said. His skin was just like a baby's. There was a pause. Billy picked up his teacup and took another sip of his tea. Then he set it down again gently in its saucer. He waited for her to say something else, but she seemed to have lapsed into another of her silences. He sat there, staring straight ahead of him into the far corner of the room, biting his lower lip. That parrot, he said at last. You know something? It had me completely fooled when I first saw it through the window from the street. I could have sworn it was alive. Alas, no longer. It's most terribly clever the way it's been done. It doesn't look in the least bit dead. Who did it? I did. You did? Of course. And have you met my little Basil as well? She nodded towards the dachshund, cuddled up so comfortably in front of the fire. Billy looked at it, and suddenly he realized this animal had all the time been just as silent and motionless as the parrot. He put out a hand and touched it gently on the top of its back. The back was hard and cold, and when he pushed the hair to one side with his fingers, he could see the skin underneath, grayish black and dry and perfectly preserved. Good gracious me, how absolutely fascinating. He turned away from the dog and stared with deep admiration at the little woman beside him on the sofa. It must be most awfully difficult to do a thing like that. Oh, well, not in the least. I stuff all my little pets myself when they pass away. Will you have another cup of tea? No, thank you, Billy said. The tea tasted faintly of bitter almonds, and he didn't much care for it. You did sign the book, didn't you? Oh, yes, that's good. Because later on, if I happen to forget what you were called, then I can always come down here and look it up. I still do that almost every day with Mr. Mulholland and Mr. Temple, Billy said. Gregory Temple. Excuse my asking, but haven't there been any other guests here except them in the last 2 or 3 years? Holding her teacup high in one hand, inclining her head slightly to the left, she looked up at him out of the corners of her eyes, and gave him another gentle little smile. No, my dear, only you.
You're right.
And that's where it stops.
Yeah.
Alright, and
That's not even a good story.
to go, I know, it's a horrible story. It makes no sense whatsoever.
But I think isn't he scared that she said
Until we go back and look at all the foreshadowing clues. And there are clues all throughout the story to help you. Once we unlock the clues, the story starts to make a lot more sense. The first clue, at the end of it, what does he say about the tea? Has a bitter almond taste. Turns out the bitter almond taste is a very indicative of something. Anytime bitter almonds, it means that one thing is connected to it. Knowing that unlocks the entire story. My guess is you don't know what bitter almonds connect to. Cyanide. Do you know what cyanide is?
It's like poison.
It's a poison. So that's one of the dead giveaways of cyanide, is the fact that it has a bitter almond taste to it. Using that, we start going back to the story, and we can start unlocking stuff. The dog and the parrot are taxidermied. Well, one, who did the taxidermying? The old lady did, so she did it herself. She's not good with living things, but apparently she can stuff things well. Which goes back to one of the very first comments he made when he looked in the window and he saw the animals. What did he say?
We must be good with people.
He says, pets are a good sign in a place like this. Why are pets a good sign in a place like this?
Because it shows they care too.
Because it shows you can take care of pets. Can she take care of pets?
No.
She cannot. Which gives you a little indicator. Then, she's aware of the skin conditions of her guests. She talked about the fact of the teeth and the fact that, do you guys know what blemishes are?
Yeah.
Blemishes are like scars, marks, pimples, and stuff like that. And she talked about the fact that Mr. Temple doesn't have a single scar or blemish anywhere on his body. How would she know that?
Check them out.
She's seen them during, we'll call it, hobby time.
Okay.
She smells like a hospital, leather, or pickles. Why does she smell like that?
Because she's like killing them.
What does that smell come from?
Pickle people.
The pickling of things.
Flesh.
The chemicals used when she taxidermies things.
People. Oh my god.
So she's
She keeps pushing Billy to drink more tea.
She wants to kill him.
Because it has
What's it called?
And there's something in that tea, and she tells us that she makes a point of going, Mr. Temple, he loved that tea. He just gobbled that stuff down. And so that becomes the big point of why she would mention that. He recognizes the names of the past residents, Mr. Mulholland and Mr. Temple. Why does he recognize those names?
They both
Hannon?
because they were like both in the newspaper for like being like killed.
Or at least not killed,
Missing.
missing. So the fact that there were both these boys that happened to come through a town and just suddenly disappear. Does anyone know he's here?
No.
Where was the last, who was the last person he talked to?
The porter.
And where'd the porter send him?
To the
Belk the Dragon. Does anyone even know to look for him here?
No.
They were both missing people at one time. She wants to make sure he has signed the book. Why does she want to make sure he signed the book?
So
That way she can
remember
own
his
him.
name.
She wants to know his name. Because she mentions the fact that sometimes she still forgets the names of Mr. Mulholland and Mr. Temple. When he first arrives at the place, were there any signs of anyone else being there? No, like the coat rack was empty and all of that. And then what does she tell him? Is there anyone else staying there at the beginning? No, she had the whole place all to ourselves. And then as we go through the story, what does she say to contradict that?
There are two other people there.
Yeah, on the 3rd floor, Mr. Mulholland and Mr. Temple are still there. Using all of these clues to put it together, what can we deduce has happened to Mr. Mulholland and Mr. Temple? Sammy?
They're dead and they're upstairs.
And?
And they're stuffed.
And they're stuffed. Because those were her little pets. And when her little pets died and passed away, she had them stuffed, and she stuffed them herself. And so she has stuffed people upstairs, along with her stuffed pets downstairs. And so you can start going back there and seeing all. Now, there's a lot more clues throughout the entire story. One, when he first starts talking and going up the stairs and talking about her, he talks about her being nice. He uses an adverb before the sayings that she's nice. And it's a very specific adverb that at the time didn't seem like that big of a deal until you find out more about who she is. And then the adverb makes more sense. Mac Ewan?
Terribly.
Yeah, she's terribly nice, which seems like a good thing to say until you realize later on, oh, that has a double meaning to it. At the beginning of it, when it talks about it being really cold out, it talks about it being the coldness was like a flat blade of ice pushed against your skin, which makes you have the idea of death and dying. So there's little hints all throughout the story that point to it. Clark?
How could the guy that wrote Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory start writing a book like that?
Like the guy who
If you've not read Roald Dahl's short stories, they're awesome. The one that I did one with my regular kids, The Man from the South.
Oh, no,
Is
please
that
don't.
worse? Is that worse?
I don't know about worse, but let's just say it's
Creepy?
fun. To
Is
say
it
the
creepy?
least.
Can we read it?
I'm not sure about
Give a summary.
It's different, to say the least.
Can we read it?
Schumacher?
Wait,
Summary.
so that means that she had to take out those men's inside.
Inner bits, yeah.
That's
Like,
Well,
The inner
that's
bits.
when you have to stuff someone. That's part of what goes into it.
I know, but like,
ate
what would
the
you do?
inner bits.
Throw it away?
Well, most people would, unless you're Abby. In that case, you eat them. But other people get rid of them. But Abby's convinced that apparently you cook them in a stew. Shove!
I don't know why, but like, is it when there's the chemical cyanide?
Cyanide?
Is it like when it's heated, does it make like a poisonous gas or something?
It can.
Because it seemed like that she was holding it above her head,
Uh-huh.
so that's why she didn't want to breathe it in so she doesn't die.
When she was bringing it in, because the steam and the vapor coming off of the tea, you don't want to be carrying it down here and have the vapor come into your, and all of a sudden you're like, hey! And you just go right down. So that's why she comes in, she's carrying it up here so that the vapor goes woo over the top of her head. And that's why she probably only has it in one of them, and she just has her own that she sips from. And you have to just make sure that you get the right ones. You probably have two different ones. That you're like, which one is yours? Never mind. Let's get some new ones. And so you have to be careful of that whole thing. Mia?
I don't get it when it said she had seen them during their hobby time. What does that mean?
She stuffed them. Hobby time is stuffing things. She
That is? That's her hobby?
apparently.
That's not creepy.
She's stuffed, a dog, a parrot, and a 28-year-old, and a
17-year-old.
17-year-old, and apparently now another
17-year-old.
17-year-old. But I have one more thing I have for you. Well, we're not. I'm going to record this part.